Thank you everyone for coming. I'm very pleased to introduce this masterclass on digital discharge, the third masterclass of 5, which forms part of the Local Government Association CHIP Digital Support Offer. My name's Georgia. I'm from the LGA CHIP Digital team, leading on this programme, which is funded by NHSX, now NHSTD, of course. It's great to be working with Rethink partners on this programme who've developed a really useful tool for the masterclass today. But before we get to that, there's just a few ground rules we'd like to cover. If we could have the next slide, please, Elle. We recommend you turn your videos off to ensure best connectivity. If you can please put yourself on mute as well to avoid audio interference, that would be much appreciated. Please do hold your questions until our Q&A. However, you can add them in the chat if you wish. If you do ask a question or have any comments, please do state your name and organisation. As you can see, we've started recording this webinar as we'll be sharing the recording alongside the slides, materials and Q&As in an email soon after the session. If you do wish, you can also tweet about this event online via the hashtag LGA Digital, but please be aware that if you do tweet, others may not wish to feature. Next slide, please, Elle. So today we'll be covering why hospital discharge is a key time to consider technology. We'll discuss some of the tech adoption challenges unique to the hospital pathway, and we'll hear council and NHS experiences of using technology in discharge. I could have the next slide, please, Elle. You can see we're really lucky to have with us together today Julie Harrison from Birmingham City Council taking us through CareTech in Action, and Lena Ramsden from NHSEI talking about virtual wards. But first we have Rethink Partners CEO Claire Morris, who'll be talking to us about hospital discharge and technology. So I'll pass straight on to her. Thanks, Claire.
Lovely, thanks, Georgia. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see some familiar and some new faces on the session this morning. There are two kind of themes to the session this morning. So obviously it's about technology and how it can be used as part of the discharge pathway. But kind of woven throughout that is also the kind of theme of integration, really, and joint working between social care and the NHS. And if ever there was a time and a moment where that needs to work really well together, it is very much as people are getting ready to be discharged from hospital and during those first really crucial weeks when people come home. So really great to have Lena here with us today. And I know joint working between NHS and social care is always a topic that all of you are interested in. So do feel free to kind of pick Lena's brains and post some of those opportunities and challenges when we get to the discussion point. Next slide, please, Elle. So some of you might know or remember that I used to work in the NHS and I led a CCG for 5 years in Essex. And hospital discharge was and remains a bit of a passion of mine. And that was really brought to life for me when Essex County Council actually commissioned some research, probably about 10 years ago now, about the impact of hospital discharge on older people and their long-term outcomes. And it really kind of shocked me and woke me up to this issue. What that research showed very much was just how much hospital admission and a hospital stay is such a huge driver of demand for social care. And that is because it can have a profoundly negative impact on people's long-term care needs. Obviously, if somebody's ill or they've had an accident, they've broken their hip, fractured neck or femur remains a #1 cause for admission for people over the age of 75, then they need to be in hospital. But the whole point about discharge is they need to be in hospital when they are in their acute phase. But as soon as they are well enough to go home, they should be supported to go home quickly. And there's lots of really international research on kind of quite how damaging it is for people's long-term outcomes if they don't get home quickly. I was just brushing up yesterday, found some really kind of quite powerful statistics. So for every 10 days that somebody spends in hospital beyond the point at which they need to be there, that it creates 10 years negative impact on their muscle tone and function. So for every extra day, that's a year of muscle tone that they will lose. And those for our older people, that's really hard to regain. They won't get that back again. And you know, those of you involved in this work will know, you know, there are real people in our hospitals and real families that are impacted by hospitalisation. And it's a moment of crisis. It's obviously can be a point of step change, material step change in care needs. But it is in our gift not to make that worse by keeping people in hospital and in the wrong place for longer than they need to be. And just some really kind of interesting research. I'll post the link in shortly. But hospitalisation for older people, it decreases their physical function. That is known. We know that. It increases their dependence. It can decrease their health-related quality of life. And that declines both when they're in hospital, but also in those first few weeks post-hospital discharge. So if we want to kind of get people back up, living independently, living good quality of lives, then getting them home quickly is just vital. You know, it is a point when they are dealing often with the challenges of adjusting to a change in their physical function, to the impact of their illness and the repercussions of their illnesses and homes. And yet we also know from research and surveys that older people want to live in their own homes as long as possible. So there's such an opportunity here, but also such kind of pressure and really easy, I think, for people, and the really long-lasting impact on their lives to get lost as we're doing this work. And for some people, they will never go home once they've been in hospital. And that's quite a shocking thing, I think, for us to sort of contemplate. They've had an accident, they've got an illness, they are possibly rushed into hospital in the back of an ambulance. They go to hospital, they've not said goodbye, they've not tidied up, they might even have left the washing up out and food in the fridge. And to think that people who've lived in that place and that building, that home, for 50 years may never go back again and may never get to say goodbye and close their lives down. And that's the real kind of human impact, I think, of this work. And I just would ask you to kind of hold that in your heads as we're talking about things today, because I absolutely believe that introducing technology, both to help people get home quickly and safely, but also to introduce technology in those few weeks after they've gone home to support their reablement, to support their rehabilitation and their recovery, and to help them perhaps to adjust to a change in their circumstances, but to use technology to help them to stay living independently in their own home is absolutely vital. And you can hear that I'm so passionate about this. And yet it is something that gets overlooked, that's forgotten. It's not an embedded part of our health and social care processes at the moment. And those of us who work in the care technology space know how transformational and supportive technology can be. So that is the kind of heart of the challenge, I think, that I'm kind of putting out to us all today, is how can we think about technology at a time when there are so many other things to think about, frankly. And we'll see some of the kind of real life experience of the pressure of hours and minutes that we have at the moment in trying to get people home. Discharge has become an increasingly high national priority. We've got proper discharge guidance for the first time over the last couple of years, and COVID has absolutely focused people's minds on that opportunity and the necessity for supporting effective hospital discharge. And during COVID, under the pressure of kind of getting people out of hospital so that those beds are free for people, obviously, who are suffering from COVID, or we thought were needed during the pandemic, we have moved heaven and earth, and we have shifted things enormously. And there's been ring-fenced funding for social care from the NHS to expedite that and make all of that smooth. that funding ends at the end of April this year. And so there's an additional challenge of how we don't sink back into the way we worked before, but how we keep that kind of laser-like focus on the importance of getting people home. And Lena is going to talk about virtual wards, but that's a really important way in which the kind of reach of the hospital is extending out into people's homes, and really also trying to think differently about how we can care for people best in their own and their own setting. Discharge to assess is at the heart of the sort of policy push at the moment, and discharge to assess has been around for quite a few years, but we're really starting to embrace it now. And the real sort of concept of discharge to assess is that when someone is in hospital and in a hospital bed and probably at their lowest ebb, that is not a good time for them and their families and us to be making decisions about their long-term care needs. They are probably at the peak of their need, and if they can get home and we have good reablement, good rehabilitation and recovery support, I'd argue with technology absolutely in that, their needs will diminish, and we can then assess their needs at a point when they're not at their peak of their needs, and we can make that long-term planning absolutely more to be strengths-based and to build on what that person actually wants from their lives and what they truly are capable of. Next slide, please, Elle. So just a reminder, for those who may not be immersed in discharge, we have national guidance. There's a link on this slide, but we broadly now talk about discharge pathways with this language now: pathway 0, pathway 1, pathway 2, and pathway 3. And it's interesting to me how quickly that's become our language, and it's actually really helpful, I think, for health and social care to work together. We know what we're talking about, we understand what that means. But just a really quick kind of recap, and this is in the tool that we've created for this masterclass. So people on pathway 0, which should be about half of the people that are going home, are people who can just go home. They're pretty fine, they're ready to go home, they need little or no additional support, they've got family, networks around them, and they can just go home and they're fine. I would argue that we should not forget about people on pathway 0 and the opportunity for technology to help them keep safe in those first few days post-hospital discharge, potentially avoid readmissions, but also to help technology maintain that independence, because there are still some pretty needy, vulnerable people on pathway 0. Pathway 1, so the broad aim is that sort of 45% of people are on pathway 1. So these are people who do need some help and support when they go home, but they might already have existing care and support in place, and that is maintained when they go home. They might need some input from community health teams, some rehabilitation support, some reablement support from social care professionals. So they're people who can go home but need some help during that period. And this is our biggest opportunity, I think, to really help people maintain independent living for longer, to minimise the need for long-term care and support. And so across pathway 0 and 1, 95% of our older people should be on pathway 0 and 1. Pathway 2 are people who do need to go, don't need to be in an acute hospital, but do need some kind of bedded support for their rehabilitation, assessment, and care planning and recovery. So those are people who are going into rehab beds, into community beds. They might be going into nursing homes, but with rehab supported. And that is approximately 4% of discharges. And then pathway 3 are those people that I've spoken about who are probably not going back home, and they are going into a 24-hour bed-based care, and that should be less than 1% of discharges, and it kind of should be, really. You don't want to go into hospital, go straight into a care home or possibly a nursing home and never go home again. So there's some ambition and challenge for us all in these pathways, but a really helpful framework in terms of how we think about those pathways out of hospitals. Next slide, please, Elle. So how do we overlay technology into that, and what might be some of the technologies be that we might think about using at that point? So I would argue start at day 0, so that actually they're still in hospital, it's the day of discharge, and there are technologies and devices that we can give people in the hospital to take home with them that can be simply activated and that will help to keep them safe for those first few days and weeks post-hospital discharge. And I'll show you some of those technologies in a moment. But basically, low cost, simple, quick to activate. It is a time, and I know there's a lot of different councils and hospitals initiating telecare at this point, but also some more digital solutions at this point, and some good work happening about stock and devices being kept in the hospital and literally being given to the person and activated so that they can take it home for them. Quickly, and this may have been assessed when they're still in hospital, but there's then day 1, day 2, actually there's something they need now. So in the same way that we might expedite putting equipment into someone's home, can we think about technology going in at this point, both to keep them safe and for peace of mind, but also starting to think about their recovery, reablement, rehabilitation needs. So are there devices, technologies we can put in that will help with their recovery and reablement, and actually can we get those in pretty quickly? Hopefully that happens, and then as we're moving through that reablement and rehabilitation period, their needs for technology might change, but this also might be the first time that that person has actually used technology and had technology in their lives to support their sort of care and daily living needs. So we shouldn't just put it in at day 2 and forget about it and leave it there. And thinking about how our reablement workers, in particular, our home care staff, our community health teams, can help to support somebody being confident and using that technology increasingly as part of daily living is a really important part. And that's a new ask of that workforce, for them to think about themselves as kind of supporters and adopters of technologies. And obviously families and carers are a really important part of building that confidence there. And then kind of from 6 weeks out, in the same way that we might review somebody's long-term care and support needs, let's review their technology offer, let's adapt it. There might be things they don't need anymore, there might be some emerging needs. So the opportunity to just flex and shape a personalised approach to technology to hopefully set people off back in their own homes, living independently, possibly with new needs, but actually still able to meet those needs, and how we weave technology through that process, I think is the opportunity. But it is challenging work, and it was interesting preparing for this masterclass, trying to find some good examples. And I've been involved with working with 2 or 3 reablement teams over the last couple of years, and it's really hard to get some of those services to think about technology along with everything else that they're having to think about. So it's a real challenge, and I don't know that we've really cracked this yet. Next slide, please. So not recommending or any of these technologies, but just some examples of some of the things that I know councils, teams are now giving people as they leave hospital. Julie Harrison's going to talk in particular about their experience of Birmingham of using Own Phone, which is the device along the bottom there. But we've got this next generation now, so replacing telecare, of these digital devices, GPS devices. They have different functionalities. Some of them have falls detectors in, so they can help know if someone's fallen, but they are really simple devices. They're not heavy, they're not unattractive or too stigmatizing. They can be on people's necks, their keyring attached to their belt, but it's a device where they can just push a button and can speak to somebody. So you need to have a kind of alarm receiving center, monitoring center behind it, but they know that they can get help quickly and easily if they need it. And these definitely are preventing readmissions where they're being used. What I would say also, the benefit of some of these is it also helps the hospital staff feel confident in letting that person go home. So it doesn't just give the person themselves confidence that they can raise help if they need it, and their families, but it also, I think, allows the hospital staff think, actually, and not wanting to hold on to people unnecessarily, but thinking it's okay, that person can go home because I know they could get help and they'll be okay. And it's interesting to see the impact on the kind of mind shift. These things definitely get people home quicker, and more smoothly and more safely. So there's a real opportunity there. Next slide, please, Elle. And then, as I just said, thinking about technology in terms of reablement and rehabilitation, and then those long-term care needs. And we're back into the world of all sorts of different types of devices and technologies. We've got smartwatches, we've got falls sensors and devices. There are devices for having people, again, kind of check in. So rather than calling help, just pushing a button and saying, yeah, I'm okay today. We have remote monitoring type technologies, sensors. Don't want us to forget the kind of consumer tech that people may already have in their homes. So how can we help them use Alexas and other smart home devices if their mobility is reduced, or to set up prompts and reminders for taking medicines, all sorts of possibilities. So we then open up into that much broader world. And we've got an adapted tablet there, lots of different types of adapted tablets available on the market. But for people who might have not much mobility or haven't used technology before, those video tablets can be a real lifeline into connecting with friends, family, social contact. But we can also use those to help deliver reablement or rehabilitation interventions, virtual consultations. So a really practical way of keeping people connected with their health and care teams, but them not having to go out all of the time. And as I said previously, getting those in for that reablement and recovery period, but then also adapting and thinking about what might be needed longer term as part of that discharge to assess process and that long-term care planning, really crucial. Next slide, please. So